This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another amazing episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC, and today we have another fun roundtable for you, all the way from Reno, Nevada. He's joined me here in the studio. You've heard his material many times, one of the best comic magicians in the industry. In fact, he was a 2017 Comic Magician of the Year. He's also the director of the Wilson Method. He is amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Wilson's in the house. Thank you, Larry, for joining us.
I like that applause.
Yeah, something special. And joining us, you hear him all the time on the podcast. Why? Because he's damn funny. Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, tremendous stand-up comic, very successful road comic, done a lot of TV, and one of my best friends in the business. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Worley.
Thanks, Scott. I'm only here for Larry.
Well, what we were trying to talk about today is that we have two aspects of stand-up comedy that work together and yet are totally different. And I wanted to bring that to my audience. Bob Worley, being a long-standing stand-up comic, is started off doing open mics and with maybe just a few minutes of material, and ended up being a headliner that could easily do an hour of material. And Larry Wilson, who you've heard, if you haven't had a chance, go back and listen to his one-on-one interview, but he got his start back doing magic early on with Hugh Hefner and the Playboy clubs and stuff, but strictly magic, I think, in the beginning, wasn't it?
Well, maybe they thought it was. But I could not ever do it seriously because just the premise, if you're a magician, what the unspoken subtext is, I have supernatural powers.
Oh, the ooh and ah of magic, right.
So if you have supernatural powers, why would you then use those supernatural powers to change a red scarf to a blue one? Right? That's to me, that's an absurd and funny premise, that I have supernatural powers, but I'm doing all these ridiculously insignificant things. Look, I can make this coin vanish. Who cares? You have supernatural powers. Fly me across the city. Produce a golden pony for me.
You're one of the more intelligent entertainers I know and work with. Do you know when the first so-called comic magician maybe appeared? Because I know back in the 40s and 50s, magic was always usually to music and pretty straightforward.
Very dignified.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, someone more learned than me, I'm sure, knows the answer to your question better. I know who most of my peers think of as the first guy is Carl Ballantine.
All right.
Oh.
You remember the amazing Ballantine.
Right. I've seen him perform.
Right.
Yeah,
of course, on the
amazing.
Ed Sullivan Show.
Yeah.
Hysterically. I mean, Steve Martin, in his autobiography, Born Standing Up, talks about seeing Ballantine on the Ed Sullivan Show and just falling on the floor laughing. I became friends. I met him, became friends with him before the end of his life, and then became friends with his daughter, Saratoga, who is the sweetest person. And Carl could not have been nicer and more encouraging and everything else. But, I mean, he would make jokes, so you couldn't always tell. But the impression I got that was pretty clear is that he started out as a serious magician and was just not getting any traction as that.
And by adding humor, he actually added another dimension to his act, so it made him a better product to put out there.
Absolutely. And also it distinguished him as different.
Right.
All the magicians, like Bob was saying, they're all very dignified. And suddenly here's this guy who's sort of spoofing
Kind
them.
of clowning around with it.
Well, and then it goes on. I mean, you just won in 2017 Comic Magician of the Year, but everybody in the listening audience knows one of the more irreverent comedy magic acts, Penn and Teller, started adding humor when they were on the streets of San Francisco and other places, and realized early on that they could captivate the audience, especially a loose street audience, by adding, you can't just do straight magic. You have to make it engaging and have a pattern.
Well, it's funny. We're going to go very far afield here. You say you can't do that, but I met Amazing Jonathan
Right.
when he was working the street, and he was deadly serious. It
Oh,
was
really?
serious magic stuff, and he told me. I mean, I can't remember. I can't imagine how young he was. He was very, very young, and I remember talking with him and him saying, "Oh, you know who I look up to and admire is this guy Harry Anderson. Have you heard?" I said, "Yeah, I know Harry, of course." But Jonathan was completely serious.
Oh, that's so funny.
And I'll tell you something. I saw Penn and Teller when there was 3 of them.
What?
Pardon me while the entire show grinds to a stop.
I did not know there was a third.
Well,
The
yes,
disappearing box trick. The guy went in and never came out.
that's exact. I saw them in San Francisco. I mean, this had to be like in the 1800s. I don't know. It was like a long time ago. They were doing a show called Asparagus Valley Cultural Society.
Oh, wow.
And there was Penn and Teller and a third guy. And I can't remember the third guy's name, and I can't remember whatever happened to him. I'm not privy to that. I don't know if he just decided to do his own thing, or they fired him, or
He was
fired
probably the
them.
founder of the group, and then they just got rid of him, like Brian Jones and the Stones.
It would not surprise me. He might be the Brian, or he might be the Pete Best.
Yeah, the fifth
You know,
Beatle.
He could, I mean, I don't know. Jill, I know, is taking a look right now, but I remember seeing it and thinking it was very funny. The show was very funny, very clever.
Well, that was something I didn't know. Now, in respective for stand-up comedy itself, obviously there was a lot of early 50s and 60s stand-up comedy. It wasn't really roaring even through the 70s. Comedy, stand-up in particular, was more like a break between jazz bands or strippers. But by the late 70s...
Which is a great gig to get.
But by the 80s, when all of us started working together, and you first hit the stage in the late 70s, early 80s, there were some people you could already look up to.
Oh, you're talking to me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, because you're seeing them on TV. You're seeing the Tonight Show, guys going on and doing it. I mean...
And there were comedy albums, Cosby.
Bill Cosby. I mean, one of the funniest rapists I
Bob
know.
Newhart.
Nobody better.
Wait a minute. Jill did some research. Jill, what did you learn? Oh, no, I have your mic on. You can just share
Don't
it.
be
Oh, I
scared.
can't say his name.
Oh, but my
You don't have
Which is why they got
glasses?
rid of him.
I don't
Penn
have
Teller
glasses
and
on.
what's
I
his
can't-
name?
Hang on. It's Weir Christopher.
Oh yeah.
Did I say it right?
I don't know. I assume that's what it was. Yeah,
So,
And it was funny because they say the Asparagus Valley Cultural Society.
that's it.
oh, that's so
That
funny.
was
So
it.
Penn and Teller had a third party. I had no
Do you want me to
idea.
follow up on Weir?
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever happened to him?
No. Is he still alive? What's
I don't
the-
need these guys. They're holding me back.
I wonder if it was. It could easily be him thinking these two guys are a drag. They're.
Well, you've told the story in we're good friends, so I know the story, but in a previous interview about you really fell into magic as a pro backwards from everybody else. People like Bob Worley got on stage as an open micer and built up, and you kind of, somebody hired you for a party and boom, you're already performing for the head of Warner Brothers,
Right.
and end up at the Playboy Mansion. But were you already doing comedy magic, or when did you start really bringing comedy into it?
Well, like I say, I could never do it seriously. I couldn't. I mean, I would try, but inevitably, Bob knows exactly what I'm talking about. Something that it's like a underhand softball pitch. You see something that's so funny and so ridiculous and absurd, you can't help but say something about it.
Which is funny because you talk about the different color scarves. If I had those abilities, that's all I would do. Look at that. That's amazing. It was red, now it's blue. Come on, everybody.
Well, Bob, you may have proved to me why magicians are so weird, because they get very,
Excited, intense.
well, not only diving into their own navels a lot of times. When a bunch of magicians get together, sometimes they get focused on the weirdest, most tiny minutia sort of things. And I could never quite understand that. When you say, I did absolutely fall into this, I meet people all the time who, growing up, that was their dream. I want to become a professional magician, and they've done all stuff. And I was thinking, that was never my dream. I just wanted to have fun and meet girls. You know?
Well, we should say and explain to the listening audience that and we were talking about before we turned on the recording, you're very good with an audience. You're a very good communicator and very funny. And even though there's magic in your act and you're officially a comic magician, I mean, I think that you could, I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried it. You could be a stand-up comic. I mean, it's not like Bob Worley. It would be, I think, awkward for you, Bob, to be doing a stand-up set and go, oh, hey, I'm going to make a scarf change colors. I mean,
I have total confidence in Bob.
it seems
Bob
like
could do
harder.
it
Although I
easily.
would have to go out and I would have to dye it, and it would take a long process, and people, come on.
Audience, be back here in a week.
Bob could easily do it. And you want to know something? It's funny you're throwing out the challenge. I think Bob would be hysterically funny doing magic. Hysterically funny.
Magic is a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
I hear these guys talk about practicing. I just don't have that kind of time to invest in that sort of stuff. So maybe if you're going to practice and stuff, it could take a lot of work.
Well, so the premise that I was thinking of previously was that the difference between a comic magician and a stand-up comic is a stand-up comic creates an idea, let's say a seed, and plants it and tries to grow it. Every time he's on stage, he's trying different verbiage, trying to hone that hunk of coal into a diamond. And then once he gets that down, he can use it for the next 10, 20 years and just has to find a way to segue it into other bits. A magician has to do a trick a certain way. It's pretty technical.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you're adding the humor, for you, it's easy because you see the fact that people think I'm amazing or magicians are actually doing magic. You know, like if you can turn a $1 bill into a $10 bill, why would I ever work? Right.
Right. Well, I mean, it's funny that you should say that because there's a very popular trick that a lot of magicians do where they borrow a dollar bill from some audience and transform it into a $100 bill.
What?
And of course, to me, what's one of the reasons I never did that trick, I learned to do it, but I never performed it, because I just could not make any sense out of it. If you could really do that, what the hell are you doing in this cheesy club? You know?
I think the real trick is to borrow a $100 bill and
turn it into a $1
There's your
bill,
dollar
right?
bill. I'll sign that for you.
Bob, I saw a guy who did that. It was hilarious, but the audience was left very unsettled. They wanted that friggin' $100 bill back. I mean, there's all these little things. And when, we've been doing this for so long, you've seen everything.
Right.
Right. So nothing surprises you, right? But every young person coming along thinks, oh, I'm the first one to think of it. I've seen guys do a sawing a woman in half, and then I don't put her back together.
So that's going to make me unique and different.
Right. And all it does is make the audience incredibly uncomfortable. Like,
You're not finishing the trick.
exactly. Something's not quite right here. Right. I can't tell you. It's like all the young screenwriters I meet who, I'm going to write the story, and it has an unhappy ending.
See, that's how you flip it.
Right. And I'm thinking, you're a genius, but make sure you have some other profession to fall back on. There's a reason why people like happy endings. There's a people.
Right. There's a reason people write and duplicate things. Well, let's break it down a little bit. So, Bob, when you're writing a comedy bit or joke, you're basically starting with a blank piece of paper. So how does a comic get an idea and gel that into material?
I just listen to old comedy records and just put my name on the bit.
Don't do that at home, ladies and gentlemen. That's called stealing. No. Look, it's serious now. How would you, if you're driving along and you think of something funny, you're going to get somewhere and you're going to write it down and then you use it on stage over and over. I'm assuming. I mean, I'm not a comic. Tell me how it works.
No, that's how it works. I mean, you get up and you try out the material and hopefully it works. And I mean, in my case, if I just got I'm keeping it in until I work on it. That's going to be there forever. Or
You get some sort of response.
Yeah, because that's all I want is a
But
response.
now, I have to tell you, I've seen Bob perform quite a bit back in those old Laughs Unlimited days. And it seemed to me, I don't really know, But it seemed to me, you clearly had structure and you clearly had prepared material. But it seemed you also ad-libbed a lot of stuff.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of ad-libs that I would, put in there just to keep it going.
Right, but I got the feeling watching you that if something scored really big, now that's going in permanently.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, that's the case. It's like, hey, they're laughing at that. What did I just say? Write that down.
Right.
On that napkin.
And that's why in my book and a lot of comedy books, when you're teaching young comics, you say record everything, because you never know what gem's going to come out of an interaction with an audience that you're going to want to keep or build on. In comparison, as a comic magician, you're starting with the trick, a solid piece, and then you build the patter around it. Is that correct?
No, not for me. But maybe other people do that, and that would probably be the smart way to do it. But nothing I do is ever the smart way. I'm stumbling into all this stuff. I didn't know what I was doing. Like you say, I was working parties, and then, because I was here in Los Angeles, and then someone at a party said, "Oh, would you like to be on television?"
Sure. Hey, you're good.
And I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Oh, I'm the talent booker for this show, blah, blah, blah." And I'd say, "Do I get paid?" And they go, "Yeah, of course you get paid." I'm in, count me in, right? Like, I have no idea. There's guys all around the country who would kill for this opportunity. I'm just thinking, great, fantastic, It's a funny thing, Scott, because sometimes that's probably a smart way to approach it. You see a premise, there's an incredible book by a guy named Daryl Fitzkey called, suddenly I can't remember the official title of the book, but the premise of it is that there are only 19 magical effects.
Oh, interesting.
In all of magic. You make something appear, you make something disappear. You transform something from one thing to another. You transposition, something moves from one place to another. There is invulnerability, like things that can't be destroyed, can't be burnt or torn, or even you might argue that cutting a person in half is invulnerability. There's
restoring something.
Absolutely. Restoration of something that has been destroyed. There's anti-gravity or defiance of gravity, improbable balance of some. So he has these whole things listed out. And
that's fascinating, because really then all of magic is somebody's version of those 9 illusions.
Exactly. And Fitzkey breaks all this down. And this book's like written in the 1930s. And he's saying exactly what you just said. He said he presents several different popular effects. And he says, look at these. These are all the same effect, but they have a different plot around them. Now, they're all serious, of course. So when I was reading that, I said, yeah, no kidding. So you could pick any kind of premise of an effect, but frequently I will sometimes I'll start with, I think of something that's a funny image, and then I'm just trying to find a trick
that goes with it.
A trick that goes with it. Oh, that's interesting.
Because yesterday, I was trying to think of a funny way to do an opening for a big show. I have this nonprofit up in northern Nevada that we do every November.
Right.
Big thing. And this will be the 8th year we're doing it. And so, I'm kind of running thin on
new material.
Especially big props, which are really expensive. And so I was meeting with a guy who's a magic builder and has some fantastic stuff. And he had what, I guess for lack of a better term, it's called a smoke cylinder. It's an upright, clear plexiglass tube. And it's used usually for a very dramatic appearance. It fills with smoke. And first we can see through it, it's empty. Then it fills with smoke. And then suddenly the door opens and someone's appeared in the smoke and steps out. And I just said, could I rent that to use for our show? And he said, oh, yeah, absolutely. I said, perfect. I said, this is like the ideal thing. There's an empty cylinder. It's very dramatic, smoke. I step forward and say, thank you for not smoking. Now-
So you have this illusion that a lot of people, a lot of magicians would use as a serious disappearance or appearance prop, and you're now looking for the way to make it humorous, right in the right pattern. Well, it's kind of similar when you're talking about different magicians take a trick and make it their own. In comedy, there's I'll just say 100 comics that have material on flying in a plane, but everybody's individual take on flying in the plane is what makes comedy unique, right? It's their personal experience that they bring to the stage in a humorous way. So they're all plane jokes or traveling jokes, and yet the comics are making it their own. And in magic, it's kind of based on a prop. I don't know, Bob, am I making any sense?
No. I love the smoke thing, though. I would love to have that on my act and just never even mention it. Just have smoke there and just keep going.
It'd be so good. Bob, I'm telling you, I know magicians who would have props on stage with them that were really wild looking, and I'd go see their show, and then they would never do that.
They never go around.
And I came up to them, I said, that thing you had with those wild radiating lines, what was that about? And they go, oh, that's a great trick. I go, but ordinarily no, I never do that trick. I just like having it on stage.
Looks so cool.
It looks so cool,
It's a good looking prop,
I couldn't
right?
afford a girl to work with me, so I just have that there.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that would be kind of funny? Imagine a magician and my lovely assistant Lola, and this beautiful woman in scantily clad comes out and stands next to him for the whole 20-minute set, never does anything.
Doesn't do anything.
That would be funny.
It would be funny.
I don't know if the audience would get out on
that's
the
a joke
joke.
you do for you.
Yeah.
Inside you're laughing. Oh, man.
You know what it makes me think of? Now I feel bad. I can't think of the guy's name. A comic that we all work with, Greg. Darn it.
Is it a magician or?
Well, no, he was stand-up, but he did a punk rock magician.
Oh, I don't know any.
You don't remember?
Was it Greg Otto?
No.
Oh, okay.
He's a magician.
He's a magician. He's a comic. This guy, you know him in a second if you saw him. He was in a bunch of Paul Verhoeven's movies. He was in Starship Troopers and Showgirls.
Well, while Jill's looking that up,
I feel terrible that I can't think of his name.
have I mentioned we got 3 old guys here on the mics that have been in business a long time?
Google.
The reason I think of this guy is because of 2 things. One, he did a punk rock magician. This is probably 40 years ago. I mean, this is so far ahead of his time. I was screaming with laughter. Now, my memory is the audience liked it. They didn't like it as much as me. They laughed, but not as hard as I was laughing. But he saw something, like the whole idea of a magician is, like you say, is very refined and sophisticated. And so he would put on this headpiece that looked like he had a purple mohawk,
Oh, yeah.
And then he would put on like a leather jacket that had studs, and he would adopt sort of a faux British Cockney accent.
Punker.
I'm
Greg
sure.
Travis?
Yes, thank
That's
you.
it, yeah.
Greg Travis?
That's terrible.
Ladies and gentlemen, Google Greg Travis and you know
Well, the more
exactly
you were
what
talking
Larry's
about the
talking
stuff,
about.
I'm going, oh, yeah.
Yeah, you could. And the whole thing is, every time he would do a trick, like he'd hold up something and make it vanish, and he'd turn to the audience very aggressively and say, "I'm fooling you, and you don't like it." Oh my God. And it just got funnier and funnier. And then, he'd say, "Look, there's a," whatever was in his hand. He goes, "Now it's gone. I'm fooling you and you don't like it." Oh, God.
Well, that is kind of like punk magic. It's kind of like in your face kind of stuff. But Bob, in stand-up comedy, there is kind of the same thing where there's different ways to entertain an audience. And it is the more obscure, esoteric stuff that people in the industry enjoy. For example, a Jay Leno or Jerry Seinfeld's pretty middle American stand-up comedy, talks about life and driving and traffic and their family and whatever. But to be honest, Bob Worley, you made a lot of success by twisting things a little bit. When you talk about your wife being pregnant or raising kids or playing with the toys of the 60s and stuff, you're putting a different twist on it. And for me, in the business, I find you even funnier than the guys that are really terrific doing straight comedy.
You mean the ones that get laughs all the time?
Well, the ones making the millions.
Those annoying laughs that interrupt your concentration.
Right. As my mom, we had that earlier tonight. My mom used to say, honey, why don't you do stuff that everybody likes?
But you get my point is that I think the people in the industry, we get jaded to, knock jokes and dick jokes and stuff. And so it's the stuff like Emo Phillips or Paula Poundstone or Bob Worley, people that do it a little bit with a twist.
Sure.
For example, you brought up Amazing Jonathan, who sadly recently passed away, but I have a great interview with him. Be sure to go back and check it out.
Oh, it's a great podcast.
The Amazing Jonathan, I cannot even imagine him being a straight magician because he was amazing as this twisted kind of sadistic magician. He would bring his assistant out and go, well, I'm going to do some magic. And with a staple gun, he's pretending to staple things to her head and they would stick.
Right.
I mean, it was magic. I'm not sure how he did.
Right.
But, and she's shrieking in pain and the audience is like, is this funny or is he torturing her?
Well, that is what I think is where he suddenly exploded and took off, is when he started to do that. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think of those guys. I know, Bob, you must have the same experience. Years on the road, you see people who didn't, for whatever reason, did not become famous, didn't catch traction or something.
I'm one of them.
But I know you saw people. I can't explain why. I just thought of a guy I saw once somewhere in the Midwest, very nice guy. His name was Ted Norkey. Does that mean anything?
No.
I think he was a Midwestern guy.
Jill will do the Googler.
I just remember this bit he did where he very low key, very low energy, kind of sad sack guy. And he said, I just remember this bit. He said, I killed Dracula yesterday. I backed over him with my car. I couldn't see him in the rearview mirror. Right. Now, I was laughing so hard.
Oh, that's genius, though.
I think it is. But, again, it's one of those things. It's like...
Right, you have to put all the pieces together in order to get the joke.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point earlier, Larry, that some of the audience is going to be with you. It's kind of like when Bob or different esoteric acts are doing their act. If you go with the comic, if you go with the entertainer and you're buying where he's coming from,
right. And
it's
that's the
so
key.
much more fun.
They have to buy into it. If they don't buy into it, it's going to be a long night.
Well, yeah, and it's like I'll give an example from my past. We were very blessed. Me and my partners were huge Monty Python fans, and before he passed, we had a chance to bring Graham Chapman into the club. And for us, this was like a comedy god. I mean, In Search of the Holy Grail, Fawlty Towers. I mean, Monty Python was one of the funniest things through the 70s and 80s. And to get Graham Chapman on our stage. So Graham, who we paid a lot of money, and it was just such a thrill to get to know him, comes out and the audience, and he's sharing these amazing stories of hanging out with the Beatles and the Stones and where his Monty Python group would get their humor and who did what and what they could count on John Cleese for and this and that. It was just fascinating. And me and my friends were just riveted that this was such an impressive, special moment that we got to share with the audience. I had more complaints from the audience than any other show I think ever produced.
Bill, right? Like an evening with Graham?
Yeah, but people go to Laughs Unlimited and they go, oh, it's going to be dick jokes and it's going to be just jokes. And Graham was sharing stories and was telling history. And we thought we're like amazed that we could bring this to an audience. And I'd say about half the audience really thought it was cool, but a good half were like, we came for jokes.
Did they know
we
who
want
he
our money
was?
back? I think they didn't get it.
There were people yelling, "Do the silly walk!"
Right. They may very well have been.
They may have been expecting actual material.
A Monty Python show.
Where's the dead parrot? And,
That's right.
and Jill's pretending to do coconuts
We like the other
for
guys.
the horses. Wait, you're not John Cleese.
That's right. I mean,
well,
you can't blame them. They don't know.
Right.
Especially if they've been to your club before. We go to the club and people put on these presentation that they obviously have prepared a show.
And you did that because you had an opener and a middle, so you know, that's ingrained.
Well,
in them.
and as a producer, I failed because I was so entranced with working with Graham Chapman and hearing his stories because I was such a huge fan. To me, it was a special moment. I was not putting myself in the audience with my normal audience and saying, will they appreciate this a wealth of knowledge in these stories that were being shared, or are they waiting for the next material about flying?
Sometimes people get it. I mean, it's like Ozzy sings Sinatra. People are going to go, oh, that's not Sinatra.
You know what? It's really true. And you shouldn't beat yourself up about it, because I think show business is probably filled with stories like this, where if you're dispassionate and cool, then you can put together the perfect show. You know, this guy and then this person, boom, it's going to kill, right? But if it's something that you so near and dear to your heart, that means so much, now suddenly you can't see it clearly.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure if you look through a film, you'll see sometimes where someone has been cast in a movie, and you're watching going, what were they thinking? The first thing I think of is, this may be completely unfair to him, Laurence Olivier, did a version of Othello. He played Othello
Oh, really?
in blackface. And watching it is really wild, because you alternately feel like, this is genius. And then also you feel like, what the hell were you thinking? Right? Are you crazy? But you keep flipping back and forth between, because the guy's an unbelievable actor, but you're also looking and going, this was not a good idea.
Yeah.
You fall in, if you feel so strongly about something, sometimes you just can't see it.
Right. And I'm sure they're thinking, we got Olivier. Olivier's going to be here. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, we're so lucky.
Right. You know this.
But I think as a producer, it's important. You have to take into account, and I have failed a few times, the perspective of the audience. So let's bring it back to stand-up. So Bob, when you're working different clubs and you're in a hip place like San Francisco or LA, and then you end up working at a show in Idaho or in the middle of Wyoming or something, how is it for a comic to adjust, or do they, or what do you do to adjust to the different audiences?
I changed my name.
Okay, well, besides that,
To somebody they really like. And they go, oh, he looks different.
you had some set material, and even though you riffed a lot, did you present the same material, or did you adjust it?
No, I basically did the same act everywhere. I mean, I might have brought in little local things to kind of try to get them on my side and, get them on board the train, and hopefully they'd go with it.
But that's a good point. By using local information and local material, you can bring an audience onto your train, as you said, and take them for the ride. And as we said earlier, it's important to have the audience going with the entertainer. But in comedy and stand-up, I was wondering, how much more challenging that is.
Oh, it's very challenging because, and it also depends on who goes up before you and what's going on in the room. So, I mean, because that sets the tone for you. The nice thing about going on last is you can watch and see what's going on and know, oh, they're going to hate me.
Well, no, in a little bit different perspective, you can tell if they're going to be a drunk, outrageous crowd, and you just have to be the shiny object, or are they paying attention and
Right.
they'll go with you if you take them.
Right, but I've also seen guys that have taken a great room and just totally destroy it for me, at least.
Oh, yeah.
Because, hey, you guys like America, and they're just drinking, and oh my gosh, now they're going to be yelling out the whole night. So when you go up with an act that you actually want to perform, they're not with you because they just want to drink now and just,
whatever.
sing
Yell and
songs, right.
scream.
I had, now see, I have to be careful. I can't tell you this guy's name because I don't want to embarrass him.
If we guess it, will you just knock your head?
We'll have Jill Google it.
Yeah, if you guess it, I'll make a facial recognition, but the people listening will never know that you got it right. I can't even tell you what he said because that will give it away too. But I was in the Midwest. Agent who books me says, oh, there's this guy who's very talented, I think has great potential, and I wondered if you could work with him a little bit. And I said, yeah, sure, okay. So he's going to be the middle act, I guess. And so
You were asked to kind of mentor him a little bit.
yeah, and I thought, well, sort of do what I can. And The guy was very nice and had, enormous personality, a very, engaging personality, very life of the party kind of guy. But his material was all incredibly filthy. I mean, beyond anything, if you hear this and you think of something filthy, much filthier than that. I mean, to me, in a perverse sort of way, it was almost funny because it was so
over the top, yeah.
And the audience, I mean, after a couple nights of this, I just realized, what Bob just said is like he's destroyed the room. Either the audience really liked him, in which case they were very angry that I was not as filthy as he was.
Right.
Because now you're bringing down the room. We were having fun, and now you're doing your little shtick.
Yeah, what is this stupid magic stuff? Or they hated him a couple nights. They were repulsed by him. But the first 20 or 25 minutes of my act, they were cringing because they assumed I was going to be the same.
What's coming next?
Exactly.
Right.
And then maybe halfway through my act, they'd start to relax and go, this is a different guy.
Did you end up going ahead of him, or did you just suffer through the week?
Oh, no. I suffered I made the mistake, foolishly. I said to him after a couple nights, I said, you have tremendous stage presence. And I said, now this will show you how long ago this was. This is how many millions of years ago this was. I said to him, if you have aspirations to be on television, you're going to really need some clean material.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I have tons of clean material. I said, wait, really? He said, oh, yeah. He said, I have like a couple of hours of clean material. I said, oh, my God. I said, well, I would love. I said, tomorrow night, could you do some of that?
At least maybe 20 minutes of it?
Well, I just said, he wasn't doing 20 minutes. He was doing like 12 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
yeah.
Of just filthy crap.
Right. The temptation to tell you the stuff he was saying, it was
over the top. Yeah.
It was otherworldly. It was incredible.
So when you said clean it up, and he says, "Oh yeah, I have the material," and you said use it, he said.
So he said, "Okay." So next night he does 12 minutes. It was squeaky clean. There just weren't any punchlines.
It wasn't funny.
But there were amazing setups if you hired someone who could write some punchlines. And after like 11 minutes of him getting absolutely no response, he just launched into a barrage of
filth.
Filth.
And
then rocked the room there.
It's a last
And then
effort.
Here's Larry Wilson.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
As a producer, I would have hated that. Well, we went down that special story, but as a comic magician, let's say as a magician, we were talking about when you're playing different places around the country, unlike a comic that wants to try to adjust to the audience, I have to assume, and this is where I wanted you to validate or argue with me, when a magician's going from California, San Francisco, somewhere hip like Boston, and then ending up in Texas or Wyoming or the South, do they feel the need to adjust their material or their patter, or are they just doing the same stuff?
Well, I think most magicians can't adjust their stuff.
Well, because you have set tricks.
Right. But even still, like I know some very famous magicians, much more famous than me, who, if you interrupt them in the middle, they have to go back to the beginning and start again. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, that's hilarious.
They have a set thing. Baby, if they're 5 minutes in and you go, hey, wait a second, they get a look in their face like, oh, no. And now I've seen it. I've seen them do it.
That's crazy.
They start at the beginning. So...
at the very beginning?
At the very...
I would love to see that. I have to bring me out and then start.
That's right.
He's repacking the scarves.
I'm telling you, I saw some stuff and I just thought, is this really happening? Yes, it really. So they, it's a very, very difficult thing. Because of the style of what I do and how I'm working, I can adjust some things. And I also, some magicians have a set order, this is the way I'm going to do this, but I have a little bit more flexibility. And so...
Well, I'm going to interject, I'm sorry, but I think what makes it different for you is the comedy magic. So a magician's doing, whether it's to music or just a straight patter, he's got a set whether it's 6 minutes or 20 minutes, and that's not going to vary no matter where he is in the world performing it. But as a comic magician, you have the ability, if you're good, to adjust the pattern, the jokes,
Right.
to fit the situation. Is that a good statement?
No, absolutely right. And, there's even more Bob was saying before about the technical of magic. And he's right. If you're there's some what are called manipulation acts, sometimes with cards or coins. In the old days, people used to do it with cigarettes, and it's a very complicated act that really cascades, down a series of things, so that when my right hand is reaching into the air to produce this, my left hand is stealing from my tailcoat the next thing I'm going to be. You can't change the order of that stuff. It has to cascade in exactly the order. I mean, if you change it, it all falls to pieces,
Yeah, one of our great horror stories of magic on stage, and not a comic magician, a straight magician, Great Scott.
Of course, I know what you're going to say.
Great guy.
Produce just dove after dove after dove. And he wanted to do it in a certain part of his show because obviously the birds are in a tough situation. And Yakov Smirnoff, who was new and young and new to the country, wouldn't break up his act. So Scott had to do a straight through thing. He was filling too much time. And Yakov wasn't trying to be mean. He was just new and trying to develop his act.
He's Russian, right?
Yeah, so, okay, maybe he was being mean. No, but he refused to play along. So Great Scott went out and did it. And now it's humorous. But at the time, the poor audience was just aghast because bird after bird, dove after dove, he's pulling out these dead and dying birds. And then he'd put them in the cage and try to lean them on the pole and lean them, and some just fell to the bottom. I'm laughing, but it was,
it's funny. I don't mean to pile on, but every club I would go into, they go, "Oh, you do magic?" I go, "Yeah." And they go, "We had a guy here just recently produced a dead bird." And I'd say, "Oh, Great Scott?" And they'd go, "Yeah, how did you know?"
And we're not being mean. Great Scott's a
He was
terrific friend.
The sweetest guy, too.
Yeah, and a great magician.
And by the way, he used that same bird for years.
That same dead one. Yeah.
But it just goes to say that he could not adjust his act because in this one case, it only happened once at our club. I mean, he performed every year. I had him around Halloween. And so he worked my club for 15, 20 years. And only time we ever saw a dead pigeon was the one time that he wasn't able to do his act the way he wanted. But that was a great example of how you can't mess with a magician's act.
No, and it's funny. I hadn't thought of this in a million years, but I was good friends with Kevin Nealon.
Right.
And one time, Kevin and I got together, and he had this idea for this thing that we worked on, which I don't think he ever did, which is a shame because it's a funny bit. But I think he had an upcoming appearance on The Tonight Show or something, where he was going to come on and say, instead of doing stand-up, he was going to say, just trying to do something new. I've been working on this magic act.
Oh, Kevin did this.
And I wanted to do it on the show tonight. I just had to tell you, the airlines lost some of my luggage. And so I hope it's okay. I'm still going to try and do it. And so the gag was supposed to be that he was going to do like some sort of manipulation act, except he didn't have the tuxedo jacket. So you could see all the stuff. It doesn't sound like Kevin. So all these things pinned all over him and hanging down, and stuff that wasn't supposed to suddenly appearing cane shooting out, and stuff. And we kind of worked on it a little bit.
I was going to say that would take a lot of work to get it right.
Clearly a labor of love to make this. But I always felt bad that we never kind of brought that to fruition because he would take that and soar.
And he would play with it so straight that this is how.
Right. Yeah. Well, Kevin was one of those esoteric acts. A lot of people remember him from Saturday Night Live, but as a stand-up before the SNL days, where he was very experimental. One of my favorite stories to share is we had Kevin, and he was trying something new, and he brought out a big old thing of paper and some charcoal.
Oh, yeah.
The easel thing. With
Yeah,
the
and he would bring a woman on stage, and he would pretend to draw her, but he was getting coal or the charcoal all over his hands, and then he'd keep adjusting her face.
Oh yeah, turn your head this way.
Yeah, and so by the end of the bit, this lady's just covered like blackface with.
But he had a really nice patter along.
Oh
with
yeah,
it.
no.
Really
Oh,
good.
it's really looking good, and the picture was always horrid. But this woman, take a bow, and she's just covered and has no clue that she's covered in chalk. But it was good that way. I'll bringing it back to magic. I'm going to share one more story because it's my podcast. And you know these people, and Bob may have heard the story before, but one time I went to the Magic Castle and I saw this amazing magic act called Goldfinger and Dove. And they were amazing. And there was birds and confetti, and it was just an amazing little set that I saw in one of the smaller theaters at the Magic Castle. So I met him after, I gave him my card, and I booked him. And I go, man, this is going to be an amazing magic act. And I booked him as headliners. They were expensive. So they come to Sacramento. They weren't big road.
I already know where this is going.
And so, I had my opening act, I had my featured act. And so here comes the headliner who's supposed to do 45 minutes to an hour. Ladies and gentlemen, these guys are amazing. I met them at the Magic Castle, Goldfinger and Dove. And they come out and they do the most beautiful, 16 minutes, 12 minutes. I think it was 12 minutes of magic. And it was beautiful, and things are appearing, and the woman's well dressed, and just magic everywhere. And 12 minutes goes by and they go, thank you, good night. And I'm like in the bar, right? And the show's over, and I go running up, and I go, well, ladies and gentlemen, I'll have the featured act come back up. And I got the featured act to go back up and do like an extra 10 minutes to try to fill time.
Kid, do you know any magic?
And I go back to the green room, and I go, Goldfinger, Dove, I booked you as headliners. I'm paying you, I don't know, I think it was like $3,000, which was a ton of money at the time. And, the headliners do 45 minutes, and they go, no, we do 12 minutes. And it's 12 minutes, no matter what. The show is the show is the show.
That's right.
We did exactly what you hired us for.
Well, see, it's so funny because I love Goldfinger and Dove so much. You may think I'm joking with you now, but I am not. In the headliner of my car downstairs, pinned into the headliner, is a Goldfinger and Dove fan club button. That God only knows how old. But I've loved them forever. They're an incredible act. And the business has obviously changed. Show business has changed. There used to be, especially, for comics, but especially for magicians or jugglers or ventriloquists, for those that were called specialty acts, there were places where you could take a 12-minute act and work forever. You could go into a review show in Las Vegas. You could go into nightclubs in certain
or
big
even the
cities.
Magic Castle, which we
Magic
were
Castle.
happily just at last night.
Absolutely, Magic Castle. You could do this, and there were so many people. I immediately thought of Norm Nielsen, this guy who did this fantastic manipulation act and had a floating violin that would play. And
Wow.
And I think his act probably was 11 or 12 minutes. And he traveled literally all over the world. And this was also an advantage if you didn't speak in your act.
Right,
Then
right.
You could work anywhere.
Perform any country in the world, right? So it's such a funny thing because, of course, Goldfinger and Dove, they had a ton more material, but it wasn't shaped into a 45-minute act.
Oh, I always wondered if that was all they had.
No. That was their killer 12-minute, probably cards, birds, manipulation stuff, just high energy, killer stuff. And, because I had seen them doing a levitation another time.
Interesting.
But the whole point is the idea of, in those days, most people weren't hired as a magic act to do 45 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, and this was early. We have to be honest. This was early in the rock and roll wave of stand-up comedy. I was one of the first clubs in the country, and they didn't know what they were getting into. It was common in the stand-up industry that the headliner did 45 to an hour.
Sure.
But in their world, no, we have a 12-minute set. By the way, I ended up making them the feature act, the most expensive feature act in the history of my
people
club.
They killed every night.
Oh my God, they must have killed.
The poor guy that had to go. I can't go up after that.
Oh my God, they must have killed.
Well, it was amazing, and the whole we've gone around, danced around a lot of different stories, but the idea is that even though stand-up comedy is a similar product that you're sharing with an audience, whether you're a stand-up comic or a comic magician, it really is two separate worlds, because as I mentioned early on, in Bob's world of stand-up comedy, you start with a concept or a blank piece of paper and you build on it. And Larry I think he's a little bit different, but to most comic magicians, you start with a trick and you write a funny patter around it, but you're ass backwards. You come up with a funny idea and then find a trick that fits it.
Sometimes, but of course, I think probably the majority of times, and I probably do it too, which is thinking, here's a basic premise, that Daryl Fitzkey book, here are these number of basic premises, and now I'm going to try and make something funny around that,
Well, it's still fascinating stuff. I really appreciate you guys joining me on this podcast, this comedy roundtable, because I think we're talking about stuff that the normal audience doesn't think about. And for my listening audience, and some I think are professionals or want to be professionals, and others are just fans of stand-up comedy, I think it's fascinating to me as a producer to realize the nuances and differences. It's all one industry, and yet there's so many different aspects and so many different ways to approach it. Bob, thank you for joining us and sharing your wisdom on stand-up comedy.
I'm very wise. A lot of people call me a wise ass.
We didn't officially introduce her, but my wife Jill has joined us in the studio and was doing some research. So thank you, Jill. And Larry, I'm going to take a moment and say thanks. My bride and I, Jill, had a wonderful evening at the Magic Castle as your guest last night. And to represent Comedy Magic and be able to get the 2017 Comic Magician of the Year to share some of the unique aspects of stand-up comedy and when it's mixed with magic. Thank you so much for sharing your...
Andy does more than 12 minutes.
Yes.
Now I have to tell you, you're forcing me to interrupt your beautiful close
No,
here.
that's good.
I produced a show years ago called Superheroes of Comedy.
Okay.
And the sly conceit was that, unlike stand-up comics, all of us had some superpower. In other words, I could do magic, and then I would have ventriloquist who could throw his voice, and then I have a juggler. And we gave them names as if they were superheroes, like the anti-gravitator and stuff like that. Right? And it was actually quite successful, and we did it in a number of different places. And one of the guys I used in the ventriloquist slot was a guy named Sammy King, who had the most bulletproof act I've ever seen in show business. Just to give you an idea of how strong this guy was, when I'd known him for several years. When I asked him to do this, he said, "Oh yeah, I loved him." And we're putting together some promotional. I said, "Do you have some promo shots?" He said, "No." I said, "You don't have any promo?" He said, "I don't have any promo material." I said, "How do you get jobs?" He said, "People always come up when they see me performing and say, 'When are you going to be available?'" And then I tell them.
So he's never had to market himself.
Never had to market him. I mean, so this guy's act is brilliant act. The short form version of it is he has a big parrot cage that's covered, and he takes it off, and there's a very stylized, obviously not real, parrot puppet in there. And the parrot puppet is, sassy and funny and great.
Good ventriloquism. Right.
Great ventriloquist. But the genius of his act is that it's structured like a pyramid, like a perfect pyramid. It's exactly 12 minutes. Here you go, okay? It's exactly 12 minutes. The first 6 minutes is funny, and there's big laughs. but it's really setting up callbacks. 6 minutes in, Sammy and the parrot get into sort of an argument. And
As often happens in the ventriloquial world.
And he's just like, I've had enough. And he puts the parrot back in the cage and puts the cover on. And then Sammy says, I'm going to now play some flamenco guitar, which he could do. So he pick up the guitar. Now, the parrot starts commenting on stuff. But we don't see the parrot. We're just hearing its voice. He set up the character so strong.
He created
just-
oh, wow, that's genius.
That he just looks back at the cage. He says, the parrot had a running joke of, don't touch my feet. And he starts playing some good flamenco stuff, and the parrot says, ooh, what fast fingers. And he says, thank you, but please don't interrupt. And the parrot says, I wasn't talking to you. Right. Now, we don't see the parrot at this point.
Right. This is just a conversation with himself.
The second 6 minutes is like a roller coaster of callbacks. All right. So this is just a setup, so you understand. So I say to him, we're doing this Superheroes of Comedy. I say, the idea is the three of us are all doing some stuff here. Can you do more than 12 minutes? And he says, oh, sure, of course. I say, well, great, because really, I'm thinking in my mind 25, something like that. And Sammy says, I have to tell you, it's not as good. And I said, I understand. You feel that 12 minutes is strong. I said, but in this case, it may serve the structure of the show. He goes, yeah. I said, so what do you feel comfortable with stretching? He goes, well, I could do 13. And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, but it's not as good as the 12. And I said, you know what? Stick with the 12. Just stick with the 12.
What was he going to do? Talk slower?
I don't know. But,
Oh, well, as usual, Larry, you always have great stories, and it just points out the differences between magic and comedy and just comedy. But it was really great to have you guys join me in the studio and share on the podcast. Thanks so much. Bob Worley, my lovely bride, Jill, Larry Wilson, thanks so much for being here.
Adios, Scott.
Thank you.
Jill?
Oh, thanks.
She was nodding her head. Jeez, come on.
What do you want me to do?
Say goodnight, Jill.
Good night, Jill.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Don't forget, next week, another great show. Thanks for listening. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.